Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, this is 143rd week of Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is the last week of November 2024. In today's podcast, we're going to talk about the Russian massive drone and missile attack on several regions of Ukraine, and we're going to cover how Russian economy is doing at the end of the third year of invasion. Ruble collapsed to the lowest level since 2022. So Russian forces carried out an overnight drone attack on Ukraine on November 28th, followed by a massive morning missile attack on the country's energy grid. According to the Air Force and monitoring channels, up to 12 Russian Tu-95 MS bombers fired Kh-101 cruise missiles on various targets across Ukraine at 5:40 o'clock in the morning. Caliber missiles were also launched by the enemy from the submarine station in the Black Sea. Explosions were reported in the western Rivne, in the Khmelnytskyi region, Volyn, and Lutsk region, and in the northern and central parts of Ukraine, including Sumy, Poltava, Kiev, and Chernihiv. The national energy company Ukrenergo introduced emergency power cuts in response to Russian strikes on the power grid. The enemy used 91 missiles and almost 100 drones for this massive strike. The enemy's missile drone strike was aimed at Ukraine energy facility, particularly while the winter is coming and the temperature is dropping. The Air Force reported that only 35 drones were shot down and 62 of them were lost, almost twice as many as were shot down. Let us let me to explain you why. A total of 12 hits were recorded, mainly at facilities in the fuel and energy sector, reported Ukraine Air Forces. As noted, almost 90% of Caliber and Kh-101 cruise missiles were shot down as a result of air battle. In addition, three guided missile and 35 Russian drones were shot down and over 60 again were lost. A drone becomes lost in location when it is suppressed by the electronic warfare complex, and its destruction can neither be confirmed nor denied. Only after verifying the drone itself, which is lying somewhere in a field or forest or floating on the surface of the lake, and so on, can it be verified that it was shut down, that it's already a downed drone officially. Another category that was destroyed is those that were shut down in the air, destroyed or fell into pieces and exploded on the surface. I read that only 17 drones during the current attack were able to reach their targets, and this confirms that the high efficiency of Ukraine air defense is about 90%. Another feature of the current attacks is the enemy's active use of fake targets. Now there are many more of them because, firstly, they are cheap to manufacture. Some of them decoy drones are even made of foam plastic. In fact, the cheapest element. They can be produced in several units per day. In Sumy region, the day before the strike, one Shahid 136 kamikaze drone and three Gerber decoy drones were destroyed. Therefore, we can draw the appropriate conclusion that the approximate ratio of drones used in 1 or 2 or 1 or to 3 ratio. That is the ratio of the attack drones itself to the decoy drone of the Gerber or parody type. Another feature of the November 28th strike was the use of caliber missiles with a cluster munition. So, and I will explain why it might be very dangerous. The fact is that caliber missiles are subsonic cruise missiles that we can intercept even with Soviet short and medium range air defense systems. Well, for example, this same book air defense system can intercept them as well. Sometimes even the old the system S-300 is used for this as well. What is the difference, for example, from the Western systems? The difference is that when we use Soviet type air defense systems, they operate on the principle of an explosion near the object itself, using many fragmentation elements to damage the missile itself. And if we're talking about a unitary type warhead high explosive fragmentation, for example, then this is, of course, sensitive to it. But when we talk about hitting such types of missiles with a cluster warhead, this is not critical for it. In fact, several submunitions are damaged, other will still work when the moment of opening the warhead of the moment of contact occurs respectively. Well, depending on the situation. And that's the problem. Western systems, such as Patriot air defense system, aim directly at the missile. It intercepts it and doesn't explode somewhere next to the missile. It intercepts and is directed along the strike vector to the warhead itself, destroying the warhead itself. Everything else already falls to the ground. Its engine and all the other remains. And that's where the difference lies between the Soviet system, of which we still have quite a lot, and those systems that intercept directly by hitting the warhead itself. A warhead with cluster elements is now becoming more and more attractive to the Russians because even when the missile is intercepted, there is a probability that a large area will be damaged. Well, for example, even when we talk about the Iskander ballistic missile, if it's intercepted in the air, not due to the destruction of the warhead, damage to the engine, then the warhead with the cassettes with the submunitions is still revealed and they are scattered over the area and do lots of damage. And therefore, there is a significant threat both to civilian population and to the buildings and other infrastructure. The geography of the shelling was very wide. They were hitting the entire territory of Ukraine. Such attacks, of course, do not occur spontaneously. They are prepared in advance, especially if we're talking not just about a large number of components in the form of drones, but specifically missiles. And in principle, this was expected. Because after the previous massive attack by Russians, one of the largest in terms of the number of air targets, they were supposed to carry out such a reconnaissance strike after some time. Therefore, the strike on November 28th can be attributed to this category. But this reconnaissance strike was not carried out in the format of limited ammunition. It was a full fledged massive missile strike. So, from this, we can conclude that the Russians are probably now trying to achieve syst- the appropriate systematically of strikes once every 1 or 2 weeks. Last week, Reuters, citing five sources familiar with American intelligence, wrote that the risk of nuclear strike remains unlikely despite the threats of Russian dictator Putin. I also think that the nuclear threat to Ukraine is minimal. What Putin is doing is, let's say, simply intimidating both the Ukrainians themselves and putting pressure on the West, and to either stop or limit the supply of weapons to end the permission and the end to permission to strike deep into the Russian Federation with Western long-range missiles. So, the intimidation of this Western audience, who is not ready to perceive such information that is compatible to the threat of nuclear strike, continues. This is also aimed at the Ukrainian consumer. First, it's essential to sow panic and chaos in the population in Ukraine and as well abroad, and especially that part of the population that is most vulnerable to such threats. Well, and of course, this is a demonstration of some kind of mighty power for our own deep rooted people. So the war continues, and the Russian economy starts showing some signs of overheating. Despite the outward appearance of stability, Russia's wartime economy faces mounting challenges. Russia's National Welfare Fund is steadily dwindling, while export revenues have gradually declined during 2024 as a result of tightening sanctions and constraints on resource extraction caused by limited access to modern technologies. As you know, most of the mining technology in Russia is made by the Western countries, and due to the sanctions, they're truly struggling and have no access to parts, and the production of energy resources becoming more difficult. Economists are now warning that the Russian economy is in danger of overheating, largely due to unprecedented military spending. Meanwhile, Russia's low unemployment rate of around 2.5% is more indicative of a severe labor shortage than a healthy economy. The problems caused by the lack of workforce and to the challenges created by sanctions related restrictions on access to Western equipment, exacerbating Russia's technological deficit. Inflation in Russia currently poses the greatest threat to Putin's wartime economy and was a key factor behind the recent decision to hike the country's key interest rate. Russia's central bank aims to reduce inflation to around 4% in 2025, but this might not be a realistic target. Indeed, official inflation data from the Kremlin might actually underestimate this rising cost of living for ordinary Russians. Over the past year, even official Russian government bodies such as Rosstat have cautiously acknowledged negative economic trends such as rising inflation, labor shortages, and declining activity in some sectors of the economy. Taken together, these negative factors are likely to contribute to a period of slower growth, if not stagnation. Sanctions have clearly complicated the situation for Russian exports and for the import of technologies. However, Russia has been able to find numerous ways of bypassing or otherwise mitigating the effects of many restrictions. Russia's economically vital energy exports have been redirected from the West to the global South, with a shadow fleet of tankers playing a critical role in this process. Last week, the greatest pleasure was watching the Russian ruble collapse. At the beginning of the week, the Russian press wrote that importers were already setting the ruble exchange rate at approximately 115, 120 rubles per dollar. As a reminder, the rate before the full scale invasion in 2022 was 75 rubles per $1. It means over the 3 years of Russian invasion of Ukraine and severe sanctions, the ruble lost around or a little bit over 40% of its value. What gave a stronger push for ruble to drop is the new sanctions against Gazprom Bank, which were finally introduced. By the way, Gazprom Bank was not the only, one of you left who was actually allowed to do some transactions. But now the sanctions hit this bank as well, because this bank, one way or another, was the main channel through which at least some currency entered the Russian market. But the sanctions blocked this pipe. For a week, the ruble did not notice the obstacle at the level of 100, quickly passed 110 level, and was stopped somewhere around 116 rubles per dollar. Apparently, there was a big panic in Moscow, and the central bank was forced to apply emergency measures, abandoning, among other things, its own policy, which had been practiced for years to stop the drastic drop of the ruble. So far, the ruble has managed to drive it below 110 mark. Whether it will last for a long time is an open question. On the other hand, the weakening of the ruble should help, in theory, to finance the crazy budget deficit, because war is very expensive. On the other hand, it contributes to inflation, which has already gotten out of the control in Russia, has shown signs of acceleration in the last few weeks, and it is the biggest challenge for the economy, provoking an additional increase in the discount rate. And in any case, a sharp devaluation leads to such an imbalance in the economy that no plus in the form financing the budget deficit helps. Moreover, oil and gas have no longer dominated the Russian budget's revenues in recent times, and therefore the impact of devaluation will be moderate, especially the devaluation that arises due to the inability of the same dollars to be converted into a larger number of rubles to enter the country. However, dictator Putin attributed the ruble's fluctuations not only to inflation but also to budget payments and oil prices, along with many seasonal factors. The Russian currency traded at 114 to the dollar on Wednesday, its weakest level since March 2022, the Russian economy said, exactly shortly after the Ukrainian invasion began. It was about 84 in early August, meaning the currency has depreciated even over 36% under 4 months, and greenback was worth about 108 rubles on Friday. Russia's central bank stepped in and shore up the floundering ruble on Wednesday. It suspended purchases of foreign currency on the domestic market for the rest of the year to reduce volatility. However, a weakening ruble benefits Russian exporters by making their goods more competitive in global markets. But at the same time, it threatens to accelerate inflation by raising the cost of imports, leaving sellers little choice but to increase their prices. Stubborn inflation has already spurred Russia's central bank to raise the main interest rate to 21%, the highest level in the last 20 years. The Russian economy has suffered from Western sanctions imposed since Putin's invasion of Ukraine, with energy revenues tanking by almost a quarter last year. Other countries, such as India, have snapped up Russia's oil instead, tempering the impact of price caps and other penalties. Against a backdrop of high inflation and fear over the value of the currency, Russia's central bank has already lifted interest rates to 21% this year. Traders now expect rates to end the year at 25%, up from expectations of 23% before the recent slide in the ruble's value. So far, the Russian government has shielded consumers and firms from the effects of higher rates via various subsidized borrowing schemes. But with public finances under pressure, support has recently been scaled back. Mortgage volumes were declining, and firms were warning of investment delays even before the latest round of sanctions. Speaking on November 19th, the government of the Russian Central Bank, Ms. Nabulina, acknowledged that the monetary policy had reached a tipping point and that the growth in corporate lending would now begin to fall, constraining demand. The combination of declining currency and a ballooning budget deficit has led to talk of a hard landing for the Russian economy in 2025, after 2 years of strong growth, which has confounded many analysts' gloomy predictions. The pace of expansion will slow sharply. The economic bill for the war is at last coming due. It could be a big one. Thank you for listening. If you like my podcast, please share with your friends.